All right, friends, today is our last day of talking about North Carolina plants and animals. So, today, to finish up, we are going to talk about three animals whose habitat is in the coastal plain region of North Carolina. So, remember, our state that we live in is called North Carolina, and there are three regions there's the mountains, there's the Piedmont, where we live, that's where Durham is, and the coastal plain, which is near the beach. So, yesterday we talked about the plants that live in the coastal plain. We talked about the Venus flytrap. We talked about the maritime oak tree and maritime forests. And we talked about Spanish moss. And remember, especially with these plants that live and grow near the coast, there are reasons why it survives at the coast. So, we're going to talk about the great horned owl. That is our first animal. And we talked a little bit about the great horned owl when we learned about owls back in October and November. So, remember, the great horned owl is a really big owl and it has tufts of hair above its eyes that make it look like it has horns on top of its head. But these owls are very, very big, and we learned the basic things about an owl, but they grow to be the size of a goose or a groundhog, and they have one of the largest wingspans at almost 5 feet across. So that is like as long as I am. So the great horned owl isn't just found in the coast. It can be found all across North Carolina, wherever there are woodlands. So remember that owls like to perch on branches or in trees. And so any place where there's woods and trees, you'll be able to find some owls. They might even roost in trees in some cities and neighborhoods. So if you're really lucky, maybe one day you could see an owl in a tree in your neighborhood. But remember, owls are nocturnal, which means they're awake during the nighttime. So usually when we're out and about, they're sleeping. But a pair of owls, they usually stay in groups of two, and they stay together for years. And they will take over an old hawk's nest, and they'll lay about 2 eggs a year. So an owl is also an oviparous animal. So owls will eat lots of things. Remember when we dissected our owl pellets, we saw lots of different things that owls can eat. They could eat beetles and mice. They might even eat small ducks, skunks, porcupines. Remember some of the owls that we looked at, their owl pellets, they ate moles. But in the cities, sometimes they might even find small cats or kittens, and they could eat those too. The next animal is called a crayfish. So, a crayfish is a crustacean, kind of like a crab or a lobster, and they live in water. They live in streams or ponds or lakes. And remember, there are lots of those near the coastal plains, but there are over 40 different kinds of crayfish, and they have 10 legs. They kind of look like little tiny lobsters that you can fit in the palm of your hand. They have the front pinching claws. They have an armored body. So they have an exoskeleton. So that means that they have a hard shell on the outside of their body that helps to protect them. They have three main body parts, just like an insect: a head, a thorax, and an abdomen. So those are the three main body parts also of an insect. And remember that exoskeleton, that hard part, their bones on the outside, help to protect them. So we have skeletons on the inside of our bodies. So the bones that we have are on the inside, and they're called endoskeletons because they are inside of us. But an exoskeleton is a skeleton that's on the outside of a body. So crayfish moms will lay hundreds of eggs at a time. And when the eggs hatch, they are only about as big as a pencil eraser. So even when they're grown up, they're still only about 2 inches long. So they're about as long as your pinky finger. And they live to be about 5 years old. Crayfish will do something called molting, which is when they shed their shell and then they make another one. And they molt about 3 times during their life. They eat lots of things like pond plants, worms, snails, sometimes even tadpoles that we learned about this week. But crayfish could also be prey to lots of other animals. They could be eaten by hawks or frogs or turtles or even some big fish. That's why they have their big tails and their pinching claws. And if they lose a claw or a leg when they're fighting to protect themselves, a new one will grow back in its place, just like a starfish. So crayfish are pretty cool. The last animal that we're going to talk about is a wild horse. So these horses are sometimes called banker horses because they live on the small islands of our state called the Outer Banks. So the Outer Banks is the group of islands that we see on the very edge of North Carolina. And so they have lived here for over 500 years. And there are about 5 groups of horses left. So lots of people are working to help protect them from becoming extinct. So these horses live on the beach, and you can actually take trips to go visit them, and you can see them from far away. But because they're wild horses, you can't really get very close to them, or you can't ride them because they aren't used to living in a barn or being ridden by people, but you can go see them living on the beach. So those are our last 3 animals that we are going to talk about. So next week, I'm going to post this whole slideshow on our Google site, and you are going to get to choose one plant that you thought was the most interesting and one animal that you thought was the most interesting. And then you're going to get to write about them. I'm going to give you a special writing assignment to talk about those 2 things next week. Have a great day, friends. See you soon.